It was meant to be a night to remember at the Plaza Live.
Hey guys, what's up? We're in Orlando today. Please come to the show if you live near Orlando, Florida. We are at the Plaza Live. Please come out.
Christina, Grimmie, and Before You Exit each delivered rousing performances to a crowd of devoted fans. The perfect way to wrap up what had been a long tour with stops from Toronto to Philadelphia and Chicago. After the show, Christina greeted fans who had backstage passes and said a prayer. Then it was time for her favorite part, the meet and greet. Before the show, her brother Mark had set up a merchandise table in the back of the theater with posters, t-shirts, and Christina's most recent album. As Mark would later tell Orlando police detectives, it was a normal night on the road.
Concert's over, I'm getting ready, just selling merch, and she's meeting people. Sometimes I'll take the picture, but honestly, I was kind of on my phone a little too. Just, when people need me to take a picture, I'll take it. If not, I'm just there.
One by one, she signed autographs, took photos, and talked with fans about her music. But at the back of the line of teenage fans lingered a man who appeared to be twice as old, Kevin James Louisville. The 27-year-old had traveled from St. Petersburg the day before and spent the night in a nearby hotel. He was wearing black jeans that concealed a pair of loaded handguns. A black cap hid the hair plugs he'd gotten in a diluted effort to improve himself for Christina. The last fan ahead of him cleared the line. Louisville approached Christina. He didn't say anything. She instinctively opened her arms for a hug, her go-to maneuver for breaking the ice with a shy fan. Louisville responded to her kindness with brutality.
I just hear a shot, and I'm looking more shots. I jump on the guy immediately, screaming at him, and he just throws me off like it's nothing. And I'm on the ground, I look up, and he pulls the trigger and kills himself.
Emergency 911, this is Tabitha. Your call's being recorded.
We need police to Plaza Live at 425 North Bumby. We have a shooting. We have one down. Active shooter. He just shot himself in the head. We have a shooter and a performer down. He's down. He's on the floor down here. The gun is secure.
Okay, did he shoot himself or somebody shot him?
He shot himself and another person.
Okay.
Come over here.
Let me use the paramedics. Don't hang up.
From the Orlando Sentinel, this is Christina Grimmie, the murder of a rising star. In this 5-episode series, we are taking you behind the police tape in one of Orlando's most shocking killings, which happened during perhaps the darkest weekend in the history of the City Beautiful. I'm Breaking News Editor Jeff Weiner. Episode 3, Like a Nightmare. Born in St. Petersburg, Florida, Danielle Hendricks moved to Orlando to go to the University of Central Florida. She became a fan of Connor, Riley, and Toby McDonough, brothers and Orlando natives who formed the band Before You Exit.
Well, one of my best friends actually was a fan first, and I remember listening to them for the first time, and I used to work at this girls' clothing store called Justice, and they were on the soundtrack. And when I listened to more of their music at first, I was like, I can't do this. This is like too, pop, bubblegum pop. But as I got more into it, I just really discovered that I liked their sound. I liked, the lyrics and the meaning behind them, and then started learning more about the guys themselves because they were locals as well.
Hendricks had never been to the Plaza Live, but had seen Christina Grimmie in concert once before. She had also watched the 6th season of NBC's The Voice. Danielle jumped at the opportunity to see the two acts on the same night.
She just had an unmatchable voice. Like, the talent was just incredible. It's like you look at her and you think, how does that voice come out of that person?
Mackenzie Barrett, who spoke in episode 1, was a longtime fan of both Grimmie and Before You Exit. For her, the tour was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. She went to 4 of the stops prior to the show in Orlando, driving from city to city and staying with friends or in hotels. But the Orlando show stood out. It was special.
That was such a great show. It was super fun. I had a ton of friends there, and I, got to see Christina and Before You Exit, and they were interacting with the crowd so much, and specifically Christina was interacting with me and my friends, which I loved, and it was just absolutely fantastic. A wonderful, huge crowd.
Christina took the stage. The opening song was a cover of Drake's One Dance. Later, her fans, known as Team Grimmie, crowded the front of the stage and sang along as she performed her originals, Liar Liar and Tell My Mama. Erin Westfall, who also spoke in episode 1, was at the show to see Before You Exit. She had never heard Christina Grimmie sing before.
I had seen Before You Exit perform as headliners other times, but the energy was completely different with her. A good concert sort of relies on the opening act being amazing, and if it's a hit and miss kind of night with them, it's probably not going to be as fun for the headliner act to try and have to get back to that level of pumped up with the audience. So I feel like the fact that she already brought it there and they just had to sort of deliver it was what made it such a good concert.
Christina's last song was Must Be Love.
Recently came out with a brand new EP, and I want to sing you a song from it, one of my favorites. So if you guys happen to know it, which this group of young ladies might, please sing along. This is called Without Him. Thank you, I love you too. Hey, yeah. Right from the start, you lured me in, took me to places I've never been. There it is. I think I'm loved. I think I'm loved.
I was right up front, so that's where all the action really was, and everyone is just singing along and, just screaming, like good screaming. And yeah, it was energetic. It was small. There were people toward the back, like parents, because a lot of their fan base is younger. They seemed to be having a good time too, but I didn't really look around that much. I was just so focused on the stage and what was happening in front of me.
Lingering in the back of the crowd, among the parents, chaperones, and family members, Kevin Loibel watched and waited. He had spent months in his darkened bedroom watching Christina's videos on his computer for hours, as his interest in her became an obsession. Now he was biding his time, waiting for the moment when he would finally meet her. The show at the Plaza Live was Erin Westfall's first concert on her own, and the night seemed to go flawlessly.
So I walked over to one of the sides of the room, and I just sort of sat down against the wall, and I called my mom because I needed a ride home. And she asked me how it was, and I was like, it was great. It was a great concert. I was on cloud 9 because I basically had proved myself to my mom at that point. And then I was talking about how I wanted to come home, and that was when the first shots were fired.
Emergency 911, this is Joe on a recorded line.
Somebody just opened fire at the Plaza Live.
Christina Grimmie's killing happened in a matter of seconds. Her brother Mark would later describe it as like a nightmare. As Christina reached out to greet him, Loibel opened fire, letting loose 5 shots from a black 9mm Glock handgun. 3 hit her. The gunfire echoed through the theater. The violence erupted without warning. Before the terror set in, there was confusion. Mackenzie Barrett thought the noise was someone popping balloons.
Because the security guards had been popping balloons earlier. So I just kind of assumed it was that until someone yelled gun and there were people running out of the building. So I immediately started running, and I was with my friend and her mom fell. She ended up breaking her ribs, but she didn't even know it at the time because of the adrenaline.
Danielle Hendricks was with a friend in a loading area behind the plaza hoping to see Before You Exit on the way to their tour bus. They would typically talk with fans and pose for photos before boarding.
I heard kind of what sounded like a speaker or a large piece of equipment falling, like from inside the venue. And I kind of looked at the side door because there had been some people, going in and out, and I didn't see anybody carrying a speaker or picking anything up. So I thought, all right, whatever. I guess they handled it inside. So there was that, and then there was about 30 seconds later, the security guards who were outside, because there was a crowd of us out there by then. They just started running at us, and they were just yelling, like, run, run, there's a shooter.
Erin Westfall estimated she was about 15 feet from Christina when the shooting began.
It was at the front of the room, and then there was a merch table. And then there was like a line of people waiting to meet her at the merch table because there was a meet and greet, and apparently he was in that line. So I didn't really notice him at first. Like, I did in the back of my mind, he looked kind of jumpy, but I just thought he was nervous, like, to meet her.
Mark Grimmie looked toward the noise to see his sister falling to the floor. He charged toward the gunman, scuffling with Loibel and tearing the killer's flannel shirt, but Loibel broke free from his grip.
And then he, comes up to me. He doesn't have the gun in his hand anymore. He's 5 feet away from me, and then he looks at me and he has he's crying, and he just stops, and then he turns around, and then he pulls out a second gun with his left hand and puts it up to his temple, and he kills himself.
Mark Grimmie never heard Loibel speak.
Literally nothing. Okay. Just walked up. If he, literally, if I heard anything from him, he didn't say a word. He didn't even make a weird face. It just happened.
Chaos erupted. Fans fled in all directions for the exits. Erin Westfall was still on the phone with her mother.
So yeah, I take a minute to process that. And then on the phone, my mom is like, what just happened? What was that? What did I hear? And I had to explain that this guy just shot himself. So she said to stay on the phone and that she was on her way. And I was like, I gotta call 911. And then I dropped my phone, getting up off the floor, crying by this point, obviously, like giant baby. And my phone disconnects from my mom. So she's driving like a bat out of hell downtown at this point. And then I tried to call 911, but it wasn't working out because my hands were shaking so bad. So I just ran. I started running out into the backstage area where people still were, and I was like, you need to go. You need to get out. There's a shooter. Some guy just killed himself. Because, I knew he was dead, but I didn't know if he was going to be the only shooter or not. So I wanted to get everyone, away from it as far as possible.
Erin fled through the back of the venue. When she got outside, the terror overwhelmed her.
And I just kind of crumpled on the ground, and I just screamed, because that's all I could really do right then. There was so much inside because I hadn't made a single noise at that point except to talk to my mom, and it just came out. I don't really understand why that was my response, but it did. And then I just remember when that was done, I made eye contact with the band Before You Exit, and they just kind of had this look on their face halfway between disbelief and pity. And they just looked kind of numb and shocked. And I was that was the lowest point, because I realized I couldn't do anything, this band had helped me through so much at that point, so much.
Mackenzie Barrett had also escaped the plaza and taken cover in the parking lot. Another fan, who she had never met, pulled up in a car and told her to get inside.
I was terrified that my friends were killed. There were 3 gunshots that started it, and I didn't know if that was killing several people, injuring people. I was terrified, and I'm friends with Before You Exit's merchandise guy, and we were scared that he was dead because he was in that area, and we were just flipping out. Everyone in the car was calling 911.
There was a gunshot at the Plaza Live in Orlando. Christina got shot. Christina Grimmie. Are you okay, ma'am? I'm just really scared.
And I decided to call my mom because they probably didn't need another person calling 911 when there were 5 people in the car calling. But so I called my mom because I knew it would be on the news pretty fast. and she knew that I was at the concert, obviously. So I called her and said, "I'm okay, I'm alive, I'm not hurt, but there's been a shooting at the concert."
Inside the Plaza Live, Mark McDonough, the father of the three brothers who make up Before You Exit, had heard the commotion from backstage. He peeked through the curtains to see fans scattering for the exit. Then, the two bodies came into view. McDonough is a doctor and ran to Louisville first, finding him lying in a pool of blood. He had no pulse. Then, he recognized Christina.
Sunken chest wound, possibly in the right lung. We have a doctor on site.
McDonough felt a weak pulse and began performing CPR. Emergency crews quickly arrived and rushed her to Orlando Regional Medical Center. She was pronounced dead soon after. As his sister was fighting for her life, Mark Grimmie got a phone call. It was his father, Albert. The elder Grimmie, who was in Los Angeles where the family lived, didn't know yet what had happened. He had wanted to talk to his son about travel logistics for Christina and Mark's planned journey home.
And I was just kind of like kneeling on the ground, and my dad wound up just calling me, let me know, because they're on the way, long story short, dropping off a car with my friends, because when we get picked up at the airport, they were going to drop me off there because I had to pick up a friend later. So he was calling me to just sort that out. And I was just out of breath, just saying, Dad, jeez, you know, that's what I told him. Okay.
Back in 2016, Detective Michael Mareschi had been with the Orlando Police Department for about 25 years and a homicide investigator for roughly a decade.
Yes, I was on call for homicide that night, and recalled because it was fairly early. It was a Friday night, but I had not been to sleep yet. And I think it was like maybe even before 11 o'clock we got called out about the shooting at the Plaza Live. Not a lot of detail, no names, but I know that I had been told that there was a shooting inside the theater. It was one of the performers, and that they believed that the person who had perpetrated the shooting had killed himself inside the theater as well.
Mareschi had never been inside the Plaza Live. By the time he arrived that night, the chaos had receded. Officers had arrived to corral the crowd and secure the crime scene. An ambulance had already left to take Christina to ORMC. Kevin James Louisville was lying dead on the floor.
At that point in the investigation, I did not know who Christina Grimmie was. I had not heard of her before that night. But this crime scene techs that were working, they knew it. And also I was, up until that time, it was the very first time I'd ever been inside of a crime scene and got a national news alert on a crime scene that I was working. And the news alert was that we had announced that she had passed away.
Typically, Mareschi's task in an investigation is to identify the killer and build a case. A slaying like Christina's, witnessed by so many, carried out by a man who then took his own life, is different.
It changed a little bit because, for me, the first person I talked to was Marcus Grimmie, and he kind of ended the criminal investigation, with his statement of saying that the person that was dead on the floor in the theater was the person who shot his sister. So for us in the investigative world, that is a cleared by death of offender, to where we know that we won't be going into court and having to prove this person's guilt because they are deceased. So at that point, my goal was to identify who that person was, because we didn't know who the guy on the floor was at that point. What his possible motive may have been if this was, an ongoing situation. And frankly, because of her celebrity, I also wanted to, guard against any conspiracy theories maybe coming up afterwards, to people saying this wasn't what it was, or that type of thing. So that was kind of, you're not going to have to go into court and prove things, but you're still trying to do an investigation at that point, to really get the family some answers as to why this happened.
After talking to Mark Grimmie and identifying Louisville, Mareshi and his partner began retracing the killer's steps, back to the courtyard by Marriott on Magnolia Avenue, where Louisville spent his last night alive.
When we were able to get into his pockets, we found a key for it. We were able to identify, what hotel he was at. And oddly enough, when we went there, I showed the desk clerk his picture, and I asked, do you recognize him? Has he been staying here? And the clerk looked at it and said, please tell me this isn't the guy at the theater. And I was kind of taken aback. I said, yeah, it is. And he goes, yeah, something was really strange about him.
They traced Louisville's path back to St. Petersburg, where Louisville lived with his father and brother. They searched his bedroom. They spoke to his coworkers and his only friend in the world.
He led a very, for lack of a better term, pathetic life. He was very secluded, to the point of being a recluse. The only time he really, from what we could find out, left his room was to go to work, and he only worked on the weekends. He would only work Friday, Saturday, Sunday nights.
While a few people in his life had noticed Louisville's growing fascination with Christina Grimmie, detectives say he had not revealed his plan to kill her to anyone. No one had heard him say a threatening word about the young singer. No one saw this coming. Do you feel, as we sit here right now, that you have a clear, theory on why he did this?
No. I very distinctly remember talking to Christina's father the next afternoon when he got into town, and I told him even if we found things on his phone or whatever, I don't think that I would ever be able to, or anyone else could ever explain why he did this. There's obviously some undiagnosed mental illness, and some of the things that he was showing symptoms of were very much about suicide. He had, in hindsight, may have said some goodbyes to people, going and buying guns suddenly like that, but nothing of a homicidal nature. He gave no indication to anyone that he was going to do her harm.
On the next episode of Christina Grimmie, The Murder of a Rising Star, the singer's tragic killing grips the nation, but only for a day.
What's going on at Pulse nightclub?
I don't know. We're hearing gunshots like crazy.
Okay, hold on the line for Orlando Police Department. Try to get yourself somewhere safe.
Yes, we're close to the shooting. A mass murder.
We are on the way. We are on scene.
Tragedy strikes again in Orlando as the darkest weekend in the city's history continues. Thanks for listening to this episode. Please rate us on Apple Podcasts and tell your friends about our show. It's available on orlandosentinel.com/Christina Grimmie, Apple Podcasts, or on your favorite podcast platform. To see photos, videos, and to read more about the case, go right now to orlandosentinel.com/Christina Grimmie. Christina Grimmie, The Murder of a Rising Star, is written and reported by Kayla O'Brien, Wesley Alden, and your host, me, Jeff Weiner, and based in part on reporting by Crystal Hayes. Editing, sound engineering, and production by Kayla and Wesley. Executive producers are Lisa Chauncey and Roger Simmons. Graphics by Rich Pope. Hi, I'm Jeff Weiner. If you would like to support more journalism like this, you can help by joining the Orlando Sentinel, Central Florida's leading source for news, information, and entertainment. Visit orlandosentinel.com/subscribe.